I just want to look at a few key features of a curve for you. Now, a curve or a polynomial is just an equation, just a function. We normally used to see in equations of lines represented as y equals. Also, sometimes you will have seen it written in the form function of x equals. Function of x just means some operation that is happening to x. Now, the bits of the curve that you should know already, we've got a y-intercept where it crosses the y-axis, and if it crosses the x-axis, we've got some roots of the graph. Now, a curve is very different to a linear graph. A curve, the gradient is ever changing along your curve. So at GCSE, when we found the gradient of a curve, if I wanted to know the gradient at this point, for example, I would have to draw a tangent at this point, and then I'd have to find the gradient of the tangent. And that would just help you to estimate the gradient of the curve at that point. When we move on to A-level and further maths, we start to look at the gradient of curves more accurately so that we're not estimating. And to help us do that, we differentiate. Now, you've done a little bit about differentiation when we started further maths before lockdown. So differentiation helps you, and the whole purpose of differentiation is to help you start to find the gradient of a curve in an accurate way. Now, that's something that we'll look at a little bit later, but I wanted to address the importance of differentiation and the fact it is the gradient in reference to these two key points of the graph. Now, these key points that I've tried to mark on in red, hopefully you can remember what they're called. So I'll give you a few seconds. So these have a name. We looked at them in GCSE and we used completing the square to help us. And these are your turning points. So it's quite nice to see, when you can see them drawn on your graph, it's where the graph turns direction. So turning point, the graph turns direction. So here the graph's increasing, and then it stops, and then it starts to decrease until it stops, and then it starts to increase again. So it changes direction at the turning points. This one, as it's going up and up and up and up and up, that's the highest it gets before it starts to come down. So that one is sometimes referred to as a maximum. And then this one down here, sometimes referred to as a minimum. So in your exams and textbooks and things, they might call them a turning point, they might call them a maximum or a minimum point. And there's another word they use as well, but that links to the gradient. Now, these 2 points, if I wanted to find the gradient of the curve at this point, I would draw my tangent, if we was at GCSE. Hopefully it might help you to start to see. If I draw a tangent at that point, as best I can, you can see that it's a horizontal line. Now, hopefully, you could figure out what the gradient of a horizontal line is. So the gradient is how much the line is increasing for every 1 unit. The gradient at this point is 0. If this graph represented the motion of a ball, the ball would be going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And then for a split second it stops before it starts to come back down. At this point, the gradient's 0. So sometimes also, because it's where the ball has stopped, it sometimes is referred to as a stationary point as well. So it could be a stationary point too. Same down here, it might be referred to as a stationary point. And at a stationary point, just like up here, your gradient is 0. Now, I mentioned earlier, you differentiate to help you find the gradient. If it's asking you to find a stationary point, you know that the gradient is 0, because at a turning point, the gradient is 0. Just to help you a little bit with the terminology, an equation can be wrote as y equals. If you differentiate that, you're differentiating y with respect to x. That means differentiation. If the graph is written as function of x, if it wants you to differentiate that, they will write it as f apostrophe x. So that means differentiation. So these two mean the same thing, they're just written in a different form.